Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, Thomas Jefferson scholar, philosopher, and historian. And in celebration of Thomas Jefferson's upcoming birthday on the 13th, perhaps we can do something to honor him. Today, I'm going to talk about his Declaration of Independence and how Jefferson took ownership of that document. That by taking ownership, I mean he declared that he wrote the document in spite of what modern scholars sometimes say. I'm going to look at the objections of Pauline Meyer and Danielle Allen to say that Jefferson wasn't really the author of the document. If he was just one author among many. Okay, on June 9, 1776, Thomas Jefferson was appointed along with John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman to a committee um, to write the Declaration of Independence. And Jefferson, during his tenure in the Continental Congress, was part of some over 30 committees, many of which he headed. And so Jefferson was eventually given the task of drafting the document by himself. And why that occurred, uh, let's try to answer that question too. Now, John Adams offers an account. He tells us that he was vitally involved in Jefferson drafting the document. He tells us that in a letter to Timothy Pickering on August 6, 1922. And I shall read from that letter what Adams has to say. He says, in answer to the question of why Jefferson drafted the document, it was the Frankfurt advice to place Virginia at the head of everything, the largest state at the time. There were three committees appointed at the same time, one for the Declaration of Independence, another for preparing the Articles of Confederation, another for preparing a treaty to be proposed to France. Mr. Lee, he's talking about Richard Henry Lee, was chosen to the Committee of Confederation, and it was not thought convenient that the same person should be on both. Mr. Jefferson came into the Congress in June 1775 and brought with him a reputation for literature, science, and happy talent at composition. Writings of his were handed about remarkable for the peculiar felicity of expression. Though a silent member of Congress, he was so prompt, frank, explicit, and decisive upon committees, not even Samuel Adams was more so, that he soon seized upon my heart, and upon this occasion I gave him my vote and did all in my power to procure the votes of others. I think he had one more vote than any other, and that placed him at the head of the committee. I had the next highest number, and that placed me the second. The committee met, discussed the subject, then appointed Mr. Jefferson and me to make the draft. I suppose because we were the two highest on the list. The subcommittee met. Jefferson proposed me to make the draft. I said, I will not. You shall do it. Oh, no. Why will you not? You ought to do it. I will not. Why? Reasons enough. This is Adams talking. Jefferson, what can be your reasons? Adams replies, reason first, you are a Virginian, and Virginia ought to appear at the head of this business. Reason second, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. Reason third, you can write 10 times better than I can. Well, said Jefferson, if you are decided, I will do as well as I can. Very well, when you have drawn it up, we will have a meeting. That's Adams' account. Jefferson disagrees with that count, and certainly I trust Jefferson's memory because Jefferson was an avid note taker and he didn't trust things to reason. Jefferson, uh, uh, well, Adams also talks about, what's interesting here is how Jefferson won him over. And Adams says that the document had a high tone with flights of oratory. And he says, especially he liked that part on Negro slavery, where Jefferson talks about the abolition of slavery. And he adds that he just doesn't see it passing the southern states. And of course, it was taken out, by the Congress. Now, in a letter to Madison on August 30, 1823, Thomas Jefferson objects to uh, um, Adams' account of how Jefferson came to write the Declaration. He said, Mr. Adams' memory has led him into unquestionable error. The committee of five met. No such thing as a subcommittee was proposed, and they unanimously pressed on myself alone to undertake the draft. So it was the other members unanimously in union that suggested Jefferson ought to do the document, right? So there's no hint at all in Jefferson's account of Adams having any significant role in forcing Jefferson to write the document. So here we go. Thomas Jefferson shuts himself up on the second floor of a building at 7th and Market Streets from June 11 to June 28, and he crafts the Declaration of Independence. Got his little writing table and so forth, his chair, his desk. And in times like this, Jefferson was remarkably focused and could do much work in a small amount of time if left to himself, um, if left in seclusion. Now, Jefferson, as is well known, the document goes to Adams and Benjamin Franklin for certain cosmetic amendments. Jefferson mentions a few verbal amendments in their own handwriting, and then it goes to the Continental Congress and gets rather heavily edited. About 1/4 of the document gets removed. Okay, now Pauline Maier, in her book, American Scripture, Making of the Declaration of Independence, she warns us against making too much of the document and making too much of Jefferson being the author of the document. She says Jefferson was no Moses receiving the Ten Commandments from God. He was part of a five-man committee which oversaw the project and edited the project. The Continental Congress got in the act, so she concludes it was no act of group editing. And then she goes on to say it's not a sacred text, and we ought not to look at Thomas Jefferson as the father of all moral principles. Where that comes out of the blue. How does he ever claim to that? And then she sums, and this is one of my favorite stupid quotes from Jeffersonian historians. Jefferson is the most overrated person in all American history. All right, hold on for that final claim. Was the document group edited? Of course it was, right? Now, every book that gets pushed through to publication at any legitimate publisher goes through editing. It goes through, there are reviewers that read it and decide whether the book ought to get published or not. And if it's going to get published, the reviewers oftentimes will have substantial comments that need to be addressed. Once the comments are addressed and it gets put forth to an editor, the publisher will have the editor suggest many edits. And at each stage, the book gets published, but at each stage, the author has the opportunity to say, no, I don't agree with, and argue against what an editor, a reviewer has to say, or argue against what an editor wants to do, and so forth, and can withdraw the project if it's not pleased with what's going on. Now, was the book a sacred text? Was the document, Declaration of Independence, a sacred text? Well, Jefferson never saw it as a sacred text, right? He didn't write it for that reason. He was just given instructions by members of the committee and the Congress to write up a document declaring declaration and to do the best job he could. That it fell exclusively upon him is what just happened, right? It wound up gaining parochial and global Catholic celebrity. That was an accident, presumably. No one saw that coming. Now, Jefferson's celebrity, today he has global celebrity because of his authorship of the Declaration. Does that make him the most overrated person in American history? Now, this is a fucking stupid claim. To justify this claim, Maier would have to have done a study prior to her death of every figure in American history, Jefferson included, and then have an argument why Jefferson is more overrated than every other figure in American history. Of course, she hasn't done that, right? Someone might come and say, "Well, Holacek, that's not what she meant." I would I would reply, "Well, that's what she said," right? And it was published. And if she said it was published, no publisher should publish something like that. The book was published by, let me look here, Vintage Books. Now, how an editor from Vintage Books could allow that comment to go unless they just are into sort of scandal mongery or exaggerated claims to sell books, I don't know. But how that would not get edited out by a legitimate publisher, that's beyond me. I don't know. Okay, there's Daniel Allen's book, published in 2014. Title is Our Declaration, a reading of the Declaration of Independence in Defense of Equality. Now, I have reviewed the book. It's a highly uneven book. And by that, I mean the scholarship is all over the place. And at times, it's like she's writing for a scholarly audience, and then she lapses into text that makes it seem she's writing for first graders. And I don't say that pejoratively, it's just factual. That's how it goes. Now, she, following Meyer, says we ought not to take Jefferson as the author, or the sole author of the Declaration of Independence. Now, her argument is a bit more textured, right? She acknowledges that the document gets edited by four other people on the committee, and right, according to Jefferson and Adams, is that only Franklin and Adams made any comments, so the other two people really didn't do much. Then she says there were the 51 other members of the Congress. There was the clerk, Matlack, who textured, let me see, says, who textured the text with his formal calligraphy. There was, for Allen, she mentions the influence of all the members of the Congress in the debates going on that influenced Jefferson, so they all could claim authorship, right? Um, uh, there was, in addition, so one gets the notion that all the members of the Congress, they're also the conversations Jefferson had prior to entering the Continental Congress that shapes his views on liberty. So, what are we to say about this? It's a very strange, I mean, her logic is very strange, and I flesh it out in an argument. Now let's look at this from the perspective of analogical argument, vis-a-vis, in other words, with respect to publishing a book, authorship of any book, claiming that anybody who writes a book shouldn't be able to claim sole authorship, right? Because of the other influences. Premise one, the author of a book has his text past the critical comments of reviewers. True. Premise two, the author of a book has his text altered by the editor of a publisher. True. The author of a book has been influenced in his views by the numerous works he has throughout the years studied. That's also true. The author of a book is influenced by the countless conversations he has had throughout his life with others. Clearly, undeniably true. Premise five, the author of a book has his text neatly ordered and beautified by the publisher. That's true. You arrange it into chapters and clean things up and you beautify the text. It follows from that countless people go into crafting any book. That conclusion follows without question. Now that's the penultimate conclusion. Now the ultimate conclusion is this: no author can claim authorship of any book. Now, when we are exposed to this argument, we see something has gone egregiously wrong when we leap from claim 6, that countless people go into crafting the book, to the conclusion that no person can claim authorship of anything, right? If someone has a scintilla of common sense, it seems that, how do you get to, you can't claim authorship because there are so many influences of, that go into a book. And that, I think, is, and I don't think I exaggerate when this is the sort of argument that Allen gives us, that Jefferson, so many people went into Jefferson's crafting of the first draft of the document, and the document, as it comes down to us, has been heavily edited, so we can't call Jefferson the author. is one of numerous authors. Everyone in the Continental Congress, and perhaps even anyone who had any direct influence on shaping Jefferson's views on liberty, must be construed to be the author of that document, right? Um, let's go back to the notion of the document that Meyer says is a sacred text. Well, it wasn't a sacred text to Jefferson. It wasn't considered a sacred text by members of the Congress, right? It was a document that fell into relative obscurity just after its publication in the States. Um, it later came to get great celebrity when people started celebrating the 4th of July rather robustly. It was a document that gained relatively instant celebrity overseas, however. Now, of the document, the notion of the document being a sacred text, Jefferson says to James Meese in 1825, later in 1825, he says, the sacred attachments of our fellow citizens to the event of which the paper of July 4th, 1776 was but the declaration, the genuine effusion of the soul of our country at that time. Small things may perhaps, like the relics of saints, help to nourish our devotion to this holy bond of our union and keep it longer alive, right? Now, uh, Jefferson's talking here of the document, he's talking, the sacredness is not the document, he says in this letter, it's the event. It's the formal acceptance of independence on July 4th. This is sort of like a saintly relic. It's merely a small reminder to Americans of that great event. There's nothing that Jefferson says in this text that makes us want to look at this as a bold, as the document itself is somehow sacred. For Jefferson, it's the event, not the document. In the same year, he writes earlier to Henry Lee, right, to the notion that the document's not highly original. He says, when forced, therefore, to resort to arms for redress, an appeal to the tribunal of the world was deemed proper for our justification. This was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, but merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent, and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we are compelled to take, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular or previous writing. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind and to give to that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. All its authority rests then on the harmonizing sentiments of the day, whether expressed in conversation, letters, printed essays, or in the elementary books of public right, as Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, Sidney. Jefferson here is clearly stating that he did not copy it, right, from any person. It's not didn't copy from Locke or George Mason. And I take him at his word here. The thoughts of Locke were so widely debated, in Mason too, that they were, commonly understood. To say that Jefferson is copying or stealing is a sort of silly argument, right? Stealing from these other liberal thinkers. The influence of More's Utopia, Mercier's Year 2440, other utopian documents too, Condorcet's History, Harrington's Oceana, Sharon's On Wisdom, Volney's Ruins came into play, as I've argued in my book on Jefferson's political philosophy and the metaphysics of utopia. So I think it does us little good to say that there's the predominance of any one work in crafting Jefferson's declaration. Now, what we do have, and I've made this argument numerous times, is the rudiments of newly forming political philosophy that Jefferson articulates in 1776, and that needs to be understood. This political philosophy, right, which will get fleshed out, right, during his tenure at France, during his tenure as Secretary of state during his vice presidency and two-term presidency, and in certain letters late in life, the year 1816 is per, you know. So that's what we have. We have a political philosophy. Now, coming back to the issue of ownership, and that's essentially what this discussion, this lecture here is about. Jefferson himself took ownership. Jefferson expressed very openly that he was the author of the document and he's going to assume authorship. He writes to William Fleming July 1, 1776, just after the document gets written and accepted by the Continental Congress. If any doubt has arisen as to me, my country will have my political creed in the form of a declaration, etc., which I was lately directed to draw. This will give decisive proof that my own sentiment concurred with the vote they instructed us to give. Jefferson is admitting, I drafted it. It is a perfect sentiment. It harmonizes the sentiments of the day, and it also summarizes my own burgeoning political views, my political philosophy at the time. So Thomas Jefferson himself expressly claims that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence, and it should be taken. Again, Thomas Jefferson has a birthday coming up on the 13th of April, and I'm offering this little discussion here on his authorship and ownership of the Declaration in celebration of that birthday. Hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed giving this, and TTFN, ta ta for now. We'll do this on another occasion again.